Well, hello. Today is the first day of fall, and so I have my pumpkin nails done. And I'm going to play with my Decadent Pies palette by Art Philosophy. This is a well-loved palette, and I have an extra one in here. I really like this palette for fall because it has a lot of fall autumnal shades, has some metallics in it. And as with all Art Philosophy products, the colors work really well together. Each palette is curated to work really well. So this is all of my palettes by Art Philosophy. And this guy right here is the Decadent Pies palette. So there's lots of different colors. I love the names: banana cream, pecan, peach cobbler, apple. There's a green in there, but it works really well for doing like fall trees, doing basically anything fall related. Now, the irony is I actually don't really like pumpkin season in terms of the flavors. I don't like cinnamon. Some people think that's crazy, but I am just not a fan. But I do like painting them. So today I'm going to show you how I like to do watercolor pumpkins, and all you need is a paint palette. It doesn't have to be Decadent Pies, but that's just what I'm using today because the colors are so great. And a black pen. Let's see here. We have our Posca pen. This is the thin one, pin type. So it's a very thin nib. I like this one. And it's an acrylic marker pen, but you could use an ink pen or something else. I like to use a lot of water to create like a flow, and then you leave it to dry and you come back and you can draw on some details. So I'm going to show you how I like to do that. Okay, let's talk about what you need for this particular set of goodies. A black pen, again, doesn't have to be a Posca pen. I find that the waterproof ink is the best, so you could use an ink pen. I really like, I'm just going to find you another one. I love these pens as well. This is the, my gosh, so well loved, these pens. Look at them. The Statler, I don't know how to say it. But this is a black ink pen also. I like a thinner tip. You'll see later on why. But again, if you don't have that and you just have a biro or even like a black pen of any description, or a Sharpie even, that can work too. We'll get onto that in a little bit. You need a paintbrush. I like to use an all-rounder brush, or one that can hold like a fairly decent amount of water. You need water as well. Paper towel if you want. You don't have to have a paint palette, but most watercolor artists will tell you to mix your paints on a palette. This is a ceramic palette by Elisa Alden Art, which I love. And then, like I said, I'm going to be using the Decadent Pies palette, but any watercolors will do in kind of autumnal shades, I guess, oranges, things like that. I'm also going to grab a concentrated watercolor, also by Art Philosophy. I've got Squash, this one, which I like, and Tangerine, which is like a brighter orange, but both of those work quite well as well, just so I've got more options. And you need paper. Now, I like to use 140-pound watercolor paper because I use a lot of water in the way that I paint. You do not have to use watercolor, that much water. That's kind of a personal choice. That's kind of my signature style, is excessive water. But I like to use watercolor paper, but you can actually do regular paper as well. So I'll kind of show you both. First thing we want to do is we want to get some water on the page. I'm just rinsing my brush, and we're going to put water directly on in, honestly, just kind of, not pineapple, kind of pumpkin shapes. So look, I don't know, I might make this a little dirty, the water, just so you can see where I'm placing it, because it's kind of hard to see if it's clear. But I'm just getting sort of pumpkin shape on the page. And it doesn't matter if it's like accurate in the way it's placement. It can be helpful to have a picture of a pumpkin or gourd to hand before you start, just so you remember what they look like. But I've been doing these a long time, so I have a pretty good idea of what looks right. And I am going to have them kind of bleed into each other today. I don't normally do that, but I think it would be quite helpful. So I'm just doing sort of some shapes in water. And the reason I do it this way is because I really love the bleeds that the water makes and the kind of organic shapes that can happen from a wet on wet technique. So I'm going to put a bunch of water on here, slightly colored, but then I'm going to drop in some colors. Now, I'm sure if you head to Instagram, or if you just look on YouTube and you look under pumpkins, watercolor pumpkins. There's probably 100 or so classes on how you can do them. There's no right or wrong way to do this, guys. You can just have fun with it, this particular style that I'm doing today. But there's loads of techniques that you could try, and this is just the one that I really enjoy because it's very relaxing, and I just love the way the water flows together, and you kind of can't go wrong because no one's going to judge you if it doesn't look like the right shape, because who's to say that that's not the shape you were going for? So now I'm just dropping in some colors that I like. Now I am going to mostly pick the oranges and brown shades, but the shape isn't as important right now as just letting the water flow. And like I said, I find this to be the most relaxing part, just watching paint flow, watercolor paint flow. I just take a little bit of paint at a time. You can add it to the palette if you like to make it more watered down. And I'm just dropping in colors to my areas that have been pre-created. Now, the beauty of pumpkins as a theme is that they are all quite unique and different. And they have lots of different shades within them often. You get white ones, brown ones, obviously the orange. And I could even drop in a bit of this blue if I really want to, because adding the blue to the reddish shade here will make like a dark chocolatey brown, and you can get quite dark pumpkins as well. And like you can see, I'm letting it spread together. And right now it's going to look a little bit like a blobby mess, and that's okay with me. I am going to take this squash color and drop him on in some areas. And this is concentrated watercolor, so it's a little more dramatic when it goes on. Also the tangerine, let's do a tangerine here. Running out of these colors. Do you know what? I'm going to put a little bit in the palette so I can sort of direct where it goes a little bit more. Oh, I dropped some. That's actually quite fun and unique. As you can see, concentrated is very fun to watch flow, and that's my goal, is getting a lot of the fun is important to me. Concentrated watercolors work very differently than regular palette watercolor, and I'm allowing this to sort of do its own thing. I have no plan to change it up. I quite like that element of surprise with the color doing what it wants to do. And I'm just sort of getting on. I want more green actually on some of these, because there are some really green like gourds and pumpkins. And remember, they don't have to be pretty. That's the other thing. They can be kind of funky looking, and it will still work for what we're doing. Now, I don't feel like there's enough differentiation between the colors on this one, so I am going to do one more kind of funky looking gourd shaped one over here. Again, get that water flowing, because I really like the way watercolor flows. That's just my favorite thing, is just to sit there and watch it. And then let's do a really orange color here. And it doesn't matter, like I said, if it doesn't look right yet. I promise it will by the end. It's just I just find pumpkins to be one of the best things to paint, because they're just so interesting. I'm now sprinkling a little bit of color, trying to stick to the same shades throughout the whole piece, because I find that if you kind of keep the same color palette all the way around, it just works really well together. And I like the way the paint will flow across. So I've got that. I'm going to go with a green as well and just sprinkle some on there too. Let the paint do its thing. There's a little bit up here that needs some loving. And I will let this dry. Let the paint flow. And we will come back to it and we will add more interest. But the initial stage is just letting the water flow. And as you can see, that didn't take very long. My whole art account is about making time for art. And I think that a lot of people assume that I'm spending hours. Now, sometimes I do, but you can knock out, you know, something artistic like this in a very short amount of time. It doesn't have to be hours. It's just getting your creative juices flowing. And for me specifically, because I use so much water, I then will leave things and come back to them. So I can now leave this to dry, and we will come back once it is dry. Now this is still drying, but what I love about watercolor, especially when you use as much water as I do, is as it dries, you get these fabulous moments that happen with watercolor. And that's what I'm going for, because they're very organic shapes and kind of work really well, I find, for something like a pumpkin or a squash. Okay, so I have the patience of a flea, so it's still a little wet, and that's fine, because I want to take a smaller brush and go in with the same colors I've been using and do like a little more detailing. So on the areas that are a little wet, I might drop in a couple more drops of this concentrated color, and I want to make them kind of, I want on this one to make it a little more blotchy looking. And then I'm going to kind of start shaping out some of my pumpkin shapes. Now, they often have little grooves that go all the way around them, and those grooves tend to be more shadowy. So they have a little more kind of coloring going on. And I know a lot of the pumpkins that you see in stores are very neat and shapely, but that's kind of unrealistic. A lot of pumpkins that grow in the wild or in like a garden or a patch, they tend to be a little more funky looking. They aren't all perfect shapes. In fact, I find the ones that have like little blobs on them to be the most interesting to look at. So I tend to lean towards that kind of a look. So I'm just getting on a little bit of shape, because that will also help me with my positioning of things like the stalk later on. And I'm just using colors that I know I've used elsewhere. I think I'm going to put a little bit of green on here. More of the, I'm going to mix in some of this dark brown and green, because if you use the colors that you've used elsewhere, they tend to work better together. A couple of dotties, like as if it's got some kind of growth on it. And like I said, I like excessive amounts of water, so you do not have to use as much water as I'm using. I just really like the look it often gives more shape to some of these. Now I think I'm going to drag like a stem from this guy, because he's still a little wet, and this one got a bit stretched too. I'm going to take some of that blue to mix it in to make a dark brown that works well with everything. And I'm going to let him spread down too. And I think I might put a couple of bubbles here and there. And this stage is more about figuring out who's in front of who. So I'm sort of planning out kind of where I want the stems to go. But again, it's not the end of the world if I change my mind, you know. Just sort of adding on little moments. Like I said, I'm also very impatient, and I don't want to wait for this to dry. I think actually for this one, I'm going to do that stalk here. And most of this I will do, you'll see, I'll do it with the pen work after the fact. So this is me being a bit preemptive. All right, now I will leave it go alone again. Let it dry, and then we'll go in with the pen. I just realized I want to do this guy up here as well. Okay, officially dry. I can touch it all over, and it's completely dry now. So that means I can go in with my pen. Now I am going to start with the Posca pen, just because I like how thick it is. I am going to just test it on a piece of paper here, because sometimes I have to get it flowing, and I have been using this one quite a lot, so I'm not entirely sure how much ink remains. Gotta be careful with Posca pens, because let's see if we can get this flowing neatly. Because it's a little bit, I don't want it to be scraggly, I want it to be a perfect flow. So it's always good to test out your pen or get it flowing before you start on a piece. Okay, he's good enough. And I'm literally going to do a very rough squiggly design around each guy, each pumpkin. I don't have any pictures in front of me to plan with. I'm just going to kind of wing it. But like I said, I find pumpkins to be very forgiving, because unless you've got a pumpkin that you're looking at all of them will work in a way to feel like it's right. I'm just moving very fast and squiggly and getting some details in areas that I think I would have that stalk. And some of them, if you've seen a pumpkin recently, most of you, if you're in the States, will see that they're literally everywhere. But some of them have stems that go up quite thick, and some of them are just swirly whirlies like this guy. Oh yes, we missed him. Now, the main thing for me is I like to kind of showcase the shape of the pumpkin. Now, I could leave this as is, but I think it's more fun to actually take the pen and sort of show almost like where the shadows are. So for this guy, I'm just going to do a little squiggly line going all the way around. And I'm deliberately not making it a straight line because I want it to be, or feel like it's one of the ones with little bumps on it, because some of these fabulous pumpkins have some real texture to them. Some of them can be smooth. Let's try this guy smooth. I'm trying to sort of feel out where the curves on my pumpkin would be, and I'm sort of just going with what shapes I initially imagined. And you want to have at least a little bit behind, by the way, the stem, because that helps it look like the stem's forward rather than you know, on top. Like it looks more three-dimensional if you have a little bit behind it. And then these guys, these like gourd shape ones, you can absolutely kind of make them bumpy and playful in that way. They're a lot more forgiving to look at, honestly. I just like to draw the like kind of the lines down the side. I think he'll be a smooth as well. You can get some pumpkins that are so perfectly rounded. They've been like bred to make perfect curves. But guess what? If it doesn't look right, like if it looks not realistic, don't worry about it. No one's gonna know. And I just love doing this for the fun. Like I said, I don't like the taste of pumpkins, but I love painting them. I think they are so fun to paint. Now this one doesn't make sense in terms of where it is on the page. Now this pumpkin could not be laying over the top of it like that. It would be totally inaccurate, but it doesn't matter because it's a painting and we could say it's abstract. I'm wondering if I could figure out how to kind of fill in these gaps. Now we could do a little bit of, like it's in the hay or something, like do a little straw, like so, to fill in that stark white area. It's not a necessity thing to do, but if you're like me and big gaps bother you, then that might be a good idea. Just doing some kind of sketchy back and forth lines as if it's like in hay. Not too shabby, don't dislike that. Now if I really want to be crazy, I could go in with another colour and put maybe some flowers in amongst here. Totally don't have to do that. I really like to mix things up, and I really love that I've got this gold metallic colour in this particular palette. So I think I'm going to put some gold paint as flowers in some of these gaps, and I'm going over the top, which is why I like to use a waterproof pen like I mentioned, and I'm just going to put some sort of floral shapes over the top of areas that felt a little too white, stark white for me, and we'll pretend they're flowers poking out, and I'll go over these with pen once they dry. Again, don't have to do that. I just feel compelled to add a little something. Also sprinkle some gold all the way around, and then leave it to dry, and I'll come back and do some details over the top of these flowers once they dry. I'll just do the same thing I did with the pumpkins. I will go over them with pen to sort of define their shapes, and the metallic tends to sit quite nicely on top of the page, on top of the paint, sorry, kind of like almost, it's not an acrylic, but it has that same vibe, I find. It goes over the top quite well. Now, one of my favorite things about metallic watercolors is that shimmer and shine. I'm hoping you can see that on the camera. It works so well, but we do have to wait for this to thoroughly dry now to be able to go over the top of them. Okay, so these guys are drying. I'm not sure if you can see the metallic shimmer on here, but that was a really great way of filling in those gaps. And I am going to, for the ones that are dry, kind of follow the line around and make some florals. Just add a bunch of petals. Maybe they're like sunflowers, or it doesn't even matter what kind of flowers they are. It's just to kind of change up that look. Goes over the top, and like I said, having the metallic like this works really well because it goes over the top of the watercolor really nicely. So I'm kind of making these more like a sunflower type vibe. Again, you don't have to be an expert drawer or sketcher to make this work. That's why I love this genre of painting, because you can just kind of have fun with it and it still feels natural. If you can see that metallic, it's so yummy. Result, showing you from the side so you can see that metallic shimmer. And there we go, we've done some pumpkins and gourds, and honestly this has been about 25-30 minutes of playtime, and with obviously waiting for them to dry is a whole other process, but overall I really like how these came together. And this is just a really great way if you want to make little place cards and add some detail to the side of them. That's one way that you can use them, or if you make Thanksgiving cards. I just really like doing these pumpkins because I find them extremely relaxing. And like I said, using the paint palette that I used today, you've got metallics in there as well. If you ever want to get your own Art Philosophy products, by the way, you can always use my discount code. It's Artoclock 15% for money off your order. I do love working with Art Philosophy, and I ended up being an ambassador for them because I use their paints so much and bought so many of their paints. Then I use the Posca pen. Again, you could use any ink pen to get that kind of side detailing. And like I said, I use a lot of watercolor, water in general, which is why I like to use watercolor paper, but you can totally do this on regular paper as well. The difference between regular paper and watercolor paper is often the buckling. The paper will buckle, as in it will start to like kind of wrinkle. Although I was kind of holding this taut while I did it, so you can still get these fabulous moments that I just love so much with watercolor. So similarly to what I did in on my watercolor paper, I'm going to show you how you can then go in and do your markings like I did on the other one. Let's use a charcoal black pen, just to show a pencil, just to show you can use pretty much anything. There is no right or wrong with creativity. Whatever you feel like doing is the right thing to do. This is going to be a totally different look because I'm not using pen, but I'm using pencil instead. But that could yield a really interesting result in and of itself. Let me know in the comments if you end up trying this method of making pumpkins this holiday season. When I say holiday, I mean pumpkin season. They're great for October. Yeah, let me know. I'm on Instagram at itsartoclock_. I'm also here on YouTube. Follow me, subscribe to my channel, and yeah, I'll be posting a lot more of these more tutorial style posts moving forward.